in about 7 seconds. One, two, three. Welcome again to the Global View with Kamal Nawash, a program that is funded and sponsored by the Free Muslims Coalition, and a program that's dedicated to having an intelligent conversation on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And this week is no different than other week. We gathered some of the most intelligent people in the industry to discuss this subject. We have with us today an attorney in California by the name of Joe Avisar. He's not only a friend of mine, but he's someone I'm particularly proud of him, and proud of his effort. He's the founder of an organization or a movement, what I prefer to call it, the founder of the Israel Peace Confederation. This is a movement where he works towards having Palestinians and Israelis practice currently to make decisions as a form of a union. And we also have with us Dr. Andrew Wilson. Dr. Andrew Wilson is a professor at the Unification Theological Seminary, where he teaches scripture. And finally, last but not least, we have with us Antonio Bittencourt, who works for the Universal Peace Federation as the director of the Office of Peace and Security. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're gonna, as you know, we're gonna jump into a controversy that occurred about 2 weeks ago with during the Super Bowl, or probably that was last week. If many of you recall, there was a big controversy when a lady by the name of Scarlett Johansson, who contracted with an Israeli soda company to do an ad on the Super Bowl. But unfortunately, she also worked for Oxfam, which is a human rights organization, and she was forced to resign from Oxfam to do the particular ad. And it's not this particular incident that I'm interested on. It's the idea of sanctions against Israel, which may or may not appear to be taking root. Today there was an article in the Economist magazine that was titled "A Campaign That Is Gathering Weight." I quote: "It said, once derided as the scheming of crackpots, the campaign of boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against Israel is turning mainstream. That, at any rate, is the fear of a growing number of Israelis. Some European pension funds have withdrawn investment. Some large corporations have canceled contracts, and the American Secretary of State, John Kerry, rarely misses a chance to warn Israel that efforts to delegitimize and boycott it will increase if its government spurns his efforts to conclude a two-state solution." So I want to discuss that first. First of all, I'm going to start with you, Joe. What do you think of this movement? Do you think that something like the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, will it actually help us reach a peaceful solution, or will it only, as some think, push Israel away and isolate Israel to where it would not want to talk to anyone? Joe?
Good morning, Kamal.
Good morning.
I support a confederation. Confederation means a third independent government for the people of Israel and Palestine together. So I look at BDS from that perspective. And the question I ask myself, does BDS help the creation of an Israeli-Palestinian confederation? Would BDS help the creation of a third independent government for the people of Israel and Palestine? So, from my perspective, BDS is not likely to help the creation of a third independent government for the people of Israel and Palestine. I look at it from a positive point of view rather than a negative. I don't believe in threatening people, and I don't believe in pressuring people. It's not in this particular case. It's not going to help create a confederation. So we have to see what's the purpose of BDS, and if the purpose is to create purpose in Israel, I think it will put pressure on Israel. But then the next question is, to what extent? What do you want Israel to do as a result of that pressure? And I think that the people who support BDS don't have an answer to that. You can pressure someone, but you need to know what is it that you expect that pressure to achieve. So I am looking at it from a completely different perspective, and I don't see BDS helping the creation of a third independent government for the Israeli and Palestinian people together.
Okay, let me go to you, Dr. Wilson. Now, you hear Attorney Avisar saying that he does not think that this will help Israel change its position in any way. Obviously, according to the people who support...
No, Kamal, that's not what I said.
Okay.
I didn't say it would not help Israel change its position. It probably will change it, but where do we want it to go? That's the question.
Well,
you need to have a goal. I mean, do you want Israel to, when you say BDS, and you need to know where do you want to push it, to what extent, for what purpose? Just to put pressure on it? And what do you want Israel to do? You need to tell me what is it that you want Israel to do.
Okay.
When you impose BDS.
Fair enough, Joe. But here we have, even in this particular forum, we have you, Joe, who supports a confederation. We have Dr. Wilson, from what I remember last time, he supports more of a two-state solution.
Okay, and, say something then?
Well, one second, I'm going to get to you. This question is coming to you. This is addressed to you, Dr. Wilson. And you have Mr. Betancourt, who I think supports the idea of a shared future. And so let's say, regardless of which one of these goals, whether you support Joe's view, whether you support Dr. Wilson's view, or whether you support my view or Betancourt's view, at the current moment, at the current time, we have a situation where Israelis are... Antonio, you might want to mute. Again. Yeah, we have a situation where the Israelis are living a relatively normal life. They're pursuing commerce relatively normally. They're able to travel. They're able to live freely. And we have the Palestinians who are unable to do any of these things. They're still under a blockade. They don't have freedom of movement. So let's say, regardless, assuming any one of these goals that are represented by the people here are the goals of the PDS movement, how can they accomplish it? How can they accomplish their goal as opposed to keeping the status quo, which is no solution, and the Palestinians are basically the ones suffering? Everyone is suffering, but the Palestinians more. So I go to Dr. Wilson. Do you think BDS has a role in reaching a solution, a peaceful solution?
Oh, most definitely. But I come at this not like Joseph sees to the Federation, except maybe as a utopian vision for 50 years from now. But I see us looking towards a two-state solution, at least as an interim step. And for the sake of a two-state solution, I think the BDS movement, if properly focused on the occupation, is an excellent tool I think the problem with Israel today is its government. Netanyahu and his right-wing supporters, like Bennett and Lieberman, are diehard Greater Israel advocates for Greater Israel, supporters of settlements, supporters of basically occupying the entire West Bank. And they don't have any compunction about continuing that effort, even as peace negotiations are going on with Secretary of State Kerry. So in that situation, pressure from Europe and pressure from the entire world through the BDS movement, targeted at stopping the settlements and reversing this trend towards occupation, I think is extremely helpful. It's helpful in the internal politics of Israel because it can hopefully energize the people on the left and the center to recognize that their vital interests, i.e. their pocketbooks, are being adversely affected by the project of the settlement. And only by that pressure can they be motivated at the voting booth to put in power a different government, a government that will make peace with the Palestinians, or, at the very minimal, bring such pressure to bear on Netanyahu that he has to move towards a different kind of coalition, bringing in Herzog and Labor. So I think the BDS movement is very important. I think that without the BDS movement, Netanyahu can just play rope-a-dope with Kerry, continue to negotiate without ever meaning to reach a genuine solution. Israel has to make very painful compromise if it is to have a two-state solution. It's going to have to withdraw so many tens of thousands of people from the settlement. And that's a very painful thing to do.
Yeah.
And right now, it's hard to see how domestically Israel has the political will to do that. So outside pressure really helps. The BDS movement, however, can backfire if the radical left in the BDS movement, those who are anti-Israel in general, confuse the message. The message must be focused only on anti-boycott. I mean, anti-occupation, not on anti-Israel in general. Otherwise, all of Israel will unite against the BDS movement, which is what the Israeli right is trying to claim about the BDS movement. The BDS movement needs to be clear about its purpose. It does have a clear purpose. Its purpose is to eliminate the occupation and to seek a two-state solution with supporting peace for Israel and peace for Palestine. Hello? That's about all I want to say. Antonio? It's to you. You have to unmute. I can't hear you.
All right, we're back. We had a little technical issue. Okay, Antonio? Antonio, can you hear us? Antonio? Joe, can anyone speak?
Yeah, I can speak.
Okay, Antonio, can you hear us? Okay, so Joe, let me go to you. I guess we're having problems with Antonio today. Joe, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you have to say about what Andrew Wilson just said, that you need that? You need the idea of PDS to basically, I mean, he supports a two-state solution, but assuming you support something else, whether it's one state or confederation, I mean, what if Israel does not move? What if Israel doesn't do anything? What option are there for people who are suffering in Palestine other than sanctions if they don't want to pursue violence?
Mr. Wilson said that the idea of a confederation is good, is a utopian idea that probably could come into reality in 50 years. I say the opposite. The idea of two-state solution. The one thing we know is that it has been tried for more than 50 years. It has been tried in 1947, and it's been tried ever since. So to tell me after more than 50 years that the idea of a two-state solution is just the only thing that needs to be discussed, and a confederation is a utopian idea in 50 years. To me, it doesn't.
Yeah, I did. Now, mute your camera so that they don't disrupt the video, and then you just.
It just doesn't make.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, I have to hang up. I had to hang up.
Yeah, continue.
Hello, Kamal, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. But Joe was speaking. Let him continue. He started speaking when you left.
Okay.
All right, Joe. I'm sorry. Continue. Joe, you're saying that it was.
So the idea is, why would you believe that two-state solution is going to happen in the near future when it's the only solution that has been tried, and it's been tried hard, and it's the only solution that failed? So it doesn't make sense to claim that this is the only solution on the table. It's not the only solution. Now let's talk about two states. Is a two states? Now let's talk about BDS and two states. Do you think Israel is likely to stop the settlements, give the West Bank to the Palestinians as a state because people are not buying their products? I think that that's a very unlikely scenario, because the first concern that Israel has from its perspective, whether or not it's true, but from its perspective, is security. And Israel is not going to give the hills over Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport to the Palestinians. It's not going to withdraw its settlements.
But Joe,
yes.
But the question is, what do you do in the short to medium term? I mean, what if these talks drag out for another 50 years and the Palestinians are suffering? So how do you solve that? How do you deal with that?
That's what I say. You create... Look.
I mean, I think it's a little unseemly to dismiss the efforts that Secretary of State Kerry is making to try to bring about a two-state solution. I would be happy to have this kind of discussion about a federation and so on after these talks break down. But let's give these talks a chance. And I think that in the context of the current political environment, where arguably the American government is doing more to try to make this work than it has in the last 10, 15 years since Oslo, I think we should give it every chance to work. And the BDS movement can be an important asset towards making it work. You may be right. It may fail. It may be another failure. But I think that now is not the time to really get into a discussion about, let's assume that the talks fail. I don't think they have to fail.
All right, let's get Antonio in here. Let's get Antonio in here. And Antonio, unmute your speakers. I mean, so what do you have to say to this? I mean, you have one at one hand saying that the PDS movement is important. The sanctions are important. And another hand, another person saying that it won't help. I mean, what is your thought about that?
Well, I haven't given up on the two-state solutions, and I appreciate the Muslim Coalition and your work for beginning a kind of a third point of view or a plan B, I may say. But I haven't given up on the two-state solution, but it's good to have this debate on what happens if the two-state solution is not viable because of A, B, or C problems that are there in the facts that are on the ground and all the historical problems that this struggle between Israelis and Palestinians have since 1948. I belong basically to tens of millions of people around the world who love Israel, love the Jews, but also we love the Arabs and the Palestinians, and we just want them to live in peace, whether it is as a two states or as one country, two states. Right now, what is on the table for the U.S., who has been involved in protecting Israel, in securing the life of Israelis and the life of the state since 1948, for the U.S., the European Union, and the international community, the focus is the two states. So I think the sanctions and the boycotts, we have to look the positive side of that, even though it does create problems for a lot of people in Israel, and as many journalists are saying, it will affect every Israeli. But perhaps that is what is needed in order to wake up and organize the majority of Israelis who haven't had any voice on what's happening to their state since 1948. Basically, the perception for us on the outside of the Jewish and Israel and Arab struggle is that only a minority since 1948 has been organized to speak on behalf of the state and to develop the whole program for security and for drafting what is the future of Israel, what is the future of homeland for Jews around the world. But the majority, they just live there. And they assume that this well-organized minority can speak for their interests. And that was basically the belief until maybe 2 or 3 years ago, when people began to see that is not so. And the international community would like to see Arabs and Israelis living together in peace. I don't see which one of the two, whether it is one country, two states, or whether it is one state for the Palestinians, one state for the Jews. We don't know which one is the best. In front of us, there are demands. The Israelis absolutely need security. Without their security, they are not going to agree in a two states.
Well, let me ask you this, Antonio. Antonio, let me ask you this.
Another demand is that they want. Another demand is that they want to be recognized as a Jewish state. And to be declared as a Jewish state, for those of us who are outside of the deeply religious ideology, we see that as a danger. I would be very suspicious of a Christian state as well as I am suspicious of a Muslim state or Islamic state. I see the problems with Saudi Arabia regarding minorities and other religions over there. And the history of Christianity is a history of abuse in the name of one religion. So the question for the majority of the Jews is, what is this Jewish state is going to be? Will this Jewish state speak for the majority of secular Jews who are not religious, and yet they are deeply, deeply Jews? In other words, they recognize ethnically as Jews. And this is what the boycott and what's developing now within Europe and the international community will force the majority to enter seriously into this discussion.
What do you think, Antonio? And I'll ask this question to the others. Why do you think it's important for Israelis to have Israel be considered a Jewish state? Why is that important from your understanding? Why is that important from your understanding?
Can you repeat the question?
Why is it important for Jews, in your opinion, or if you know, why is it important for Jews, in your opinion, to want Israel to be recognized as a Jewish state? To want Israel to be recognized as a Jewish state?
I cannot speak because I'm not a totally. I am 15% a Jew. So
well, give me
I have a very small minority Jewish opinion on that. That can mean many things, but I think the most important thing is security. They want a place where not just today, but 100 years from now, and 200 and 300 years from now, their lives be protected. Their lives, their property, their aspirations, that they can have a future without being dictated by outside forces and outside ideologies.
Okay,
they want to have that kind of security.
Let me go to Joe with that same question. Mr. Avasar.
Yes, sir.
All right. The question, Antonio raised the question of Israelis, and certainly Netanyahu is insisting that the Palestinians recognize Israel as a Jewish state. As an Israeli yourself and as a Jew, can you shed some light as to why this issue is important for Jews or for Israelis to have Israel be recognized as a Jewish state? Or is it important?
Well, Israel made peace with Sadat and didn't require him to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Israel made peace with King Hussein and didn't ask for him to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So probably in all likelihood, the reason they want Abu Mazen to recognize Israel as a Jewish state because they know he's not going to do it. And which brings me to the idea of a two-state solution. I'm not sure why they use the word solution after the word two states. Even if they separate. And for the life of me, I don't understand why they think that separation is peace. Separation is divorce. It's not peace. So even if they separate, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be peace between them. Actually, it's the opposite of peace. Israelis and Palestinians have to learn to live with each other and to focus on the land as the first issue. I'm not saying don't do that, but I am saying it doesn't really lead to peace. It leads to a conflict, because when the first thing you negotiate is where is going to be my land, where is going to be your land, that's the most difficult issue to discuss. And that's what I say, starting with the two-state solution is a formula for failure, because you start with the most difficult issues. And we have started with that more than 60 years ago. We already went through this. So why repeat the same mistakes over and over again? Now, to answer Dr. Wilson's claim that let's wait until Kerry succeeds or fails, I say fine, let's wait. I'm not rooting for him to fail. Just the opposite. I hope he can bring peace. But I am saying until he succeeds and until he fails, let's say he succeeds 3 months from now. What's tomorrow? How are we going to live in peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians tomorrow? Not 3 months from now. We need to learn to live in peace. And one way to do it is to create a confederation. So confederation is not either or. Confederation is both. You can have a two states if you choose, but also you need to learn to live in peace today. And that to me is more important. Just like a patient that is sick and has high blood pressure, and you don't tell him wait until you have surgery, and until that time you continue to eat junk food and you don't need to exercise. You need to exercise today. You need to exercise tomorrow. You need to learn to eat well and exercise. And if you learn to eat well and exercise, that may be enough. You may not need the surgery. But I'm not against the surgery. I'm just saying learn to eat well and exercise today. And that's what a confederation is. So it's a simultaneous track, not either or track.
Thank you, Joe. I mean, Joe certainly makes a great point there. And one thing that impressed me about what Joseph said that I didn't hear either said addressed is he's saying, look, we've pursued the two-state solution for what, 60 years, 50 years, whenever?
Since 1947, the UN voted on a two-state solution in 1947.
And, you know, any way you look at it, I think if you look deep inside people's hearts, it's a very, very difficult solution. I mean, yeah, you're asking both sides, from the way I see it, is to give up on something or to swallow a pill that's very, very difficult. You're asking them to separate a land that they believe is inseparable. So I didn't hear anyone address this issue that we've been doing this two-state solution for a very long time. I'm not saying the Confederation or the Federation or the one state is perfect, but I mean, shouldn't we at least start considering ideas like that of Joseph Avasar, like that of those who support a federation, or like my friend Yehuda Schwartz and others? Shouldn't we at least consider? But before we get to that, I also want to mention a point that was mentioned by Antonio and connected with something that one of the audience made. Antonio said the idea of a Jewish state, he's opposed to it, and I'm certainly opposed to it, just as I'm opposed to an Islamic state, a Muslim state anywhere, because I believe when you have a state based on religion, whether you have other religions in the country or not, more often than not, you will probably have a discriminatory system, because you're picking sides. When you have Christians, Jews, and Muslims there, and you say, we're going to call ourselves Jewish state, you're really just picking a side. Similarly, when you have a quote-unquote Muslim country with all the religions and you call yourself an Islamic state, you're picking a side. You can't help but be a discriminatory state. But one thing that came to mind is that Jews refer to the idea of Jewishness different than Christians and Muslims refer to their identity as Christians and Muslims. When I say I'm a Muslim, I'm referring to a religion. That's my religion. That's what I seek to practice. When someone says I'm a Christian, he's referring to the religion he's choosing to practice. But correct me if I'm wrong, Jews seems to interpret the idea of being Jewish as almost as an ethnicity, as one of the tribes. And so I wonder if when they refer to a Jewish state, it's like saying, I want the Palestinian state as an ethnicity as opposed to a religion. And if that is the case, are they, in another word, saying that they want to be recognized as natives to this land more than they're saying that we want it to be a Jewish state? And if they're saying they want to be recognized as natives to the land, maybe the better solution is to say both Palestinians and Israelis need to recognize both sides as natives to this land. Dr. Wilson, how would you address the last point?
You make a very good point, because this whole concept of Jewish is very much more than religion. I mean, the experience of being a Jew for 2,000 years has been an experience of persecution. And when Hitler was sending the Jews to the gas chambers, he didn't ask their religion. You were Jew by blood. So it doesn't matter whether you were atheist, a Buddhist, or even a Christian. If you were Jewish by blood, you were sent to the gas chambers. So the idea
what does it mean, Jewish by blood?
for a Jewish people, Jewish by blood means your grandparents were Jewish. The law in Germany was if your grandmother was Jewish, you were Jewish. So I think a state for the Jewish people would be a better term than a Jewish state, because I don't think Netanyahu, especially with Lapid in the coalition, is thinking about granting authority to the extreme religious parties in Israel. I mean, that's a whole domestic political discussion in Israel, but there's a lot of backlash against the growing power of the Haredim. And I don't think that when Netanyahu was saying we want a Jewish state, he's thinking about a religious state. I think he's thinking about the very real, the DNA of Jews, which is that we have been persecuted as long as we've been a minority. Even in so-called enlightened Christian Europe, we ended up getting murdered and slaughtered like pigs. So for that reason, we need a state of our own where we can be masters of our own destiny, and we will not be at the mercy of a majority of some other religion.
So would you want Israel to be considered recognized as a Jewish state? Dr. Wilson, are you saying you would insist on the Palestinians recognizing Israel as a Jewish state?
I'm saying that when Netanyahu speaks like that, he's speaking to Jewish DNA, and he speaks to something that is very deeply held by all or most, maybe 80 or 90% of Israelis, and the whole basic reason for Zionism going back to Theodor Herzl, which was not about driving out Palestinians. I mean, it was about establishing a homeland for the Jewish people where they would be in a majority and they would be able to control their own destiny. And so when Netanyahu speaks like that, he's speaking to something very, very deep in the Jewish psyche. And this, by the way, is one of the things that mitigates against the federation, because any situation where Jews were sharing a land with another ethnicity and they weren't able to have a majority would be seen as an existential threat. You're not just talking about whether someone is going to throw a few terrorist bombs. You're talking about an existential threat. And I think that that's why Netanyahu can get away with that kind of language. I think Palestinians need to be wise about this. Let me finish.
Okay.
I think that instead of simply rejecting it out of hand, I would like to see Abbas ask for clarification. What do you mean by a Jewish state? And most importantly, what does that mean for the Muslim minority, the Arab minority that live in Israel? Are you saying that by being a Jewish state, we are not going to treat our Arab minority with equal rights, which of course is the case now, because we clearly see the Israeli Arabs are not getting a fair shake. Or can Israel be a Jewish state and also guarantee the rights of its minorities? And I think that if Netanyahu would be able to give that kind of more nuanced position, or if Abbas were to insist that Netanyahu give that more nuanced position, maybe Abbas could say yes. But then there's the other issue, which is the issue of the Palestinian refugees, which is I think another aspect of this Jewish state thing, because I think that by doing that, Netanyahu is trying to create a precondition that the refugees will not be allowed to return to Israel. They must go to Palestine. And so there's a lot of complexity here in this Jewish state issue. It didn't come up with Egypt and with Jordan, because those were not countries where you have 2 million or 3 million refugees who are asking to come back and reoccupy the villages that they were living in before 1948. That's the kind of thing that is non-negotiable, I think, for Israel. I don't believe Israel would ever accept more than a token number of refugees, maybe 50,000 or 100,000 at the very, very most, to return. And so by declaring that Israel is a Jewish state, that would free condition the negotiations towards that result. Well, I think Netanyahu has a few reasons for going this way, and I think Abbas needs to, instead of just categorically rejecting it out of hand, I think he should be wise about dealing with it and looking at the nuances.
But Israel has never, in the last 50 years of negotiations, until actually the last 2 years, I think, they've never insisted throughout their peace talks with the Palestinians that they recognize Israel as a Jewish state. And even without that request in the past, it has been extremely difficult to reach a peaceful solution. So I wonder if what Mr. Avasar says has a kernel of truth when he says that he thinks that Netanyahu did it because he knew Abbas wouldn't accept it. And
well, he may be right, and that's where BDS comes in. That's what we need pressure, because if indeed Netanyahu is just doing this as a delaying tactic, and we all know that Netanyahu never shows his hand, then he needs to be called on that. And that's why pressure is important. It would be a tragedy if Netanyahu's whole purpose in negotiating with Kerry is simply to delay and not to seriously come to a peace agreement. And if that is in fact his purpose, then I think that there needs to be enough economic pressure on Israel basically for regime change to occur in that country. And
well, all right, let's move into the next topic now, which is why we wanted to come here today. Now, one of the things, one of the reasons, of course, we invited Joseph Avasar here, but certainly we could have invited also a whole lot more people to join. We're limited by the forum, but Joseph Avasar, in my opinion, represents a new movement that began, I think, showing its face maybe the last 6 years or so, where an increasing number of people are no longer asking for a two-state solution, a traditional two-state solution. If Joe Avasar had said what he said 10 years ago, I'm guessing Israelis would have probably called him a traitor. And similarly, if you had Palestinians say, hey, such as myself, I think we need to think of a shared future of living together with Jews as equals, certainly that would have been seen bizarre by Palestinians. Do you think the fact that people like Joe Avasar, or even myself, or Yehuda Schwartz, or Yehuda Gezel, and the many people, I'm sorry, not Yehuda, Rafi Gezel, the many more people who are beginning to talk about the idea of a shared future, of the idea of a one state or something like that, including members within the Knesset, and including members within the Palestinian government who have mentioned it in the last 4 years when we never used to hear it. And I'll go to Antonio first for this. Is this the beginning of something, or is this a passing fad? Do you think people are beginning to think like Joe Avasar by saying, look, we've been talking about these two states for 50 years, it's not going anywhere. Maybe the idea of a shared future, whether it's a confederation or a federation or one state, is risky, but maybe we can work it out in a way that it can be workable, such as in Nazareth or Haifa or Jaffa or even the old city of Jerusalem. Antonio, do you see a new trend here that may lead somewhere among Palestinians and Israelis? If you hear me, Antonio. I think...
Well, the thing is that so far we have not heard what the majority of the Israelis want from the point of view of a Jewish state. Is this Jewish state in line with the aspirations of the majority of the secular Jews? These are questions that are beginning to be debated, beginning to be raised. So far, the majority of Israelis, they just live and let live. they're not involved in the ideological questions. They have trust the minority who has controlled the state and the ideas for the last 60 years. But now, what's happening with the mobilization of the international community, not to shame Israel, not to delegitimate Israel, or to punish Israel, because that's not the intent of the international community. What's happening is that by the pressure and mobilization of the international community, we are basically seeing that the majority of Israelis get organized just like the minority organized for the last 60 years. The majority has to decide what kind of state they want that will protect them all the way into the future, but one that will protect the rights of people, including minorities and minority religions. We don't want Israel to become another Saudi Arabia or another Iran, which is very easy if you let a minority decide what is it that you need and what your interest. So that I keep saying that the mobilization of the international community to whack Israel and to give it a gentle spank to Israel is basically to wake up the power of the majority that has been basically not involved. They go and vote for whoever the rabbi or whoever in the minority tell them is in your interest to vote for this party and to keep the status quo. The status quo worked for them for the last, but it's not going to work towards the future. And that's what Kerry and the European Union, the representatives of the European Union are saying. You have to get involved, because without the organized, they cannot get things done. They have to organize, and so far only a minority within the Jews have been organized, even in the United States as well as in Israel. And now another issue is the issue of return of refugees. This is a very complicated and unreasonable demand, because the Palestinians do not own a monopoly on displacement of people. Look at Russia. How many millions of people were displaced in Russia under communism? How many tens of millions were displaced in China? In countries even as recent as Nicaragua, when the Sandinistas got into power, a lot of people who live in Las Colinas were displaced. And even though it was only 10, 15 years that they were displaced, they didn't come back. So this absolute demand for the Palestinians to come back to their homelands is unreasonable. I don't say that they don't need to be compensated. There are ways to be compensated in which Israel and the international community who wants to protect Israel and make sure that Israel is comfortable with a solution that favors the majority, not a minority, but the majority of Israelis, and is in accord with the aspirations of the international community who love Israel and who love the Palestinians. So these things has to be put out into the table and be discussed openly, and this is what's happening right now. In a sense, we have to be grateful to Kerry that by going there more than 40 or 50 times, more than any other Secretary of State in the history of the U.S., has really put so much pressure and been labeled as a fanatic and messianic, all kinds of things. So it's putting the pressure basically to the majority of the Israelis to enter into the debate and to decide what is in their best interest.
Thank you. I want to speak in support of what Joseph and others who support a federation are doing. Because I think that it's changing the narrative for Israelis generally, people to think of Palestinians not as their enemy, but rather as their friends and co-workers in building peace. the fact that more and more Jews like Joseph, more and more Israelis like Joseph, are beginning to think about working hand in hand with Palestinians is wonderful. The fact that people in Palestine are thinking of working hand in hand with Israelis is wonderful. And I think that the biggest thing that has keeping a two-state solution from happening is this attitude on the part of Israelis and Palestinians that the other side is the enemy. The two peoples live too closely together. The borders are so intertwined, especially in the area of Jerusalem, that to think that I'm going to live in a state and then I'm going to allow my enemy to live 2 blocks away or 500 yards away, whatever, it's totally unreasonable. There has to be a sense in which Jews and Palestinians are pursuing this as a common project. I don't go so far as a federation, but I do believe that in order for a two-state solution to work, there has to be cooperative management of many aspects of it. There have to be, like between New York and New Jersey, there's a port authority, and both New York and New Jersey, within the port authority, and they operate the bridges and the tunnels. Well, there's going to be bridges and tunnels all over the place to deal with places where Israel and Palestine have traffic that cross each other, like in E1, for example. You're going to need an authority, a joint authority of Israelis and Palestinians to manage that. And how about the old city? If we're going to have a place where the Muslims from Palestine can go and worship on Al-Aqsa, and the Jews can go and worship at the Wailing Wall, there's going to have to be some kind of a joint authority to manage the old city. So we really need people on both the Israeli side and the Palestinian side to think about cooperating. There has to be reciprocity, for instance, for those settlers that decide to remain inside Palestine and become a Palestinian citizen. And I'm sure there will be some who will want to do that. But there has to be a lot more cooperation. I know there's a little bit of security cooperation going on right now, but it needs to go a lot deeper and further for it even to support a two-state solution. So in that sense, I'm really positive about what Joseph is saying and what others are saying who want to work hand in hand across the border.
Well, next I want to go to Joe. Now, Joe, I actually, believe it or not...
I hear a lot of echo. I can't hear you very well.
Okay. Is this better or echo?
Antonio, are you muted?
Joe, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Joe, I actually, believe it or not, in my heart of hearts, agree with you that I would prefer that there not be sanctions or boycott or anything of Israel. Life, like you, but with different details, that separation is not the answer. Now, I go a step further. I say I think we would like a federation similar to the United States, but the details don't matter here. But I want to go back, even though I would love for there not to be sanctions, for there not to be boycott, for there not to be divestment. The fact is, I just came from Israel-Palestine, and I always refer to it as Israel-Palestine because that's the only term I feel comfortable with. From the minute I step into Israel to the minute I leave, I feel absolute discrimination. I mean, in every aspect of life. For someone like me, and I have it much better than the local Palestinians because I still have an American passport, which doesn't help much, but it makes the situation a little better. I mean, we're not allowed to use the airport. I have to travel to Jordan, even though I'm an American citizen, and then take a bus and be interrogated for 5-6 hours. And God forbid if they think that I'm moving back. I have to purposely take a small suitcase so that they don't think I'm coming back to live there. And so for someone like me who does not want sanctions, who does not want divestment, what solutions do I have? What solutions do I have when Israelis don't seem to care about me whatsoever, don't seem to care about me. If I don't want, now I recall during the civil rights movement in the United States, many Jews were actually leaders in the civil rights movement in the United States, where they were asking for equality and freedom for blacks. Why aren't we seeing, or don't you think in order to avoid the divestment movement or the sanctions movement, we need to hear more from Jews in Israel who say, look, we cannot keep doing this to the Palestinians. We cannot keep boycotting them. We cannot prevent them from working. We cannot prevent them from having a normal life. We cannot keep discriminating against them like this. Don't you think that's necessary, or else divestment and sanctions are almost certain to happen unless Jews speak up?
Oh, I absolutely think that it is necessary, and I think that Israelis and Israelis in Israel do say that. The problem is, it doesn't lead anywhere. You can say all the beautiful things in the world. You can talk about peace, and you can talk about equality, and you can talk about every nice thing you want to talk about. But it really not leading to anywhere. That's why I am not having my hope with the Israeli government, and I don't have my hope with the Palestinian government. To me, they both failed. And I don't have hope with all these high expressions of equality. I think that you need a body of legislators, you need a body of laws, and I disagree with you, Kamal, that the details don't make a difference. I think the details do make a difference.
Oh, they do, but
okay.
But I'm just saying for this second, from the point I was making.
Yeah, but that's why, and I want to talk. I want to address Mr. Dr. Wilson's point that the Israelis are going to see a confederation as an existential threat. But based on the formula that the confederation has, the confederation is going to be below the Israeli and below the Palestinian government. So both governments will have a veto power over the confederation. And that will take away the existential threat that the Israelis or the Palestinians feel against their government. The idea is that in this day of history, we need to be sophisticated. We don't need to be powerful. We need to be sophisticated. We need to come up with formulas that neither side, neither the Israeli nor the Palestinian side, can reject in good faith. So you asked me, you were almost, Dr. Wilson, you were almost saying a confederation about cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians. We actually came up with legislation that the confederation can come up with. And that would be, for instance, how to share Jerusalem. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a physical breakup of a city. You can come up with a joint Israeli-Palestinian police force that would be civil to both the Palestinians and the Israelis, and allow both sides to pray and go to the holy places, but they will have distinct uniforms. They're not going to be Israelis. They're not going to be Palestinians. They're going to be both. With regard to the checkpoints, they will be able to guard those checkpoints, so Israel will not be threatened by potential terrorists, and the Palestinians would be treated with fairly and would be treated with respect. Instead of having a checkpoint in Kalkilia, that is horrible. I just went through it a month ago, several times, and I'm going there 10 days. There's a horrible scene over there. Instead of having that checkpoint, why not create a joint economic zone that will be controlled by the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, not by the Palestinian government, not by the Israeli government, by an independent entity, which is called Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. And instead of having this horrible-looking checkpoint, why not have university there, an international airport there, industry, education, all managed by the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. Now, that's not an existential threat to the state of Israel, just the opposite. It will elevate the state of Israel. And it's not an existential threat to the Palestinian. It would elevate. So I am saying, instead of threatening people, instead of pushing people, why not be positive and try to come up with better ideas rather than primitive ideas?
Joe, let me pick up on this issue that you picked up. Maybe one way to do this, maybe another way, and I'm not going to take too much of your time, but you're obviously an Israeli. Dr. Wilson is Jewish ethnically, and Mr. Bancourt is at least 15%, although rumor has it he's 16.5%. But but my point is, how did you reach a point, unlike many Israelis or many Jews or many of those who support Israel, how did you come to a point where you don't see having some kind of shared future with the Palestinian as a danger?
Well,
as opposed to separation. How did you get to this point in life where you think, separating is not the answer, two states is not the answer, we need to cooperate, we need to work with the Palestinians? How did you reach this point in life? I'm curious.
All right. It takes a while to develop, and it takes a while, but I have a long story. But I look at you, I look at any other Muslim, and I look at myself, and I say, well, we actually look alike. We are the same people, and the only difference is what's in our inside of our head, which is I believe in, or I say I believe in Moses, and you say you believe in Muhammad. That's the only difference between us. Now,
we believe in Moses too, don't forget.
Okay, and you may not believe in Moses. I mean,
no, I said we do. I said we do.
Okay, all right. That's the only thing that. Okay, but we're both secular.
Yeah.
80% of Israel is secular. 80% of the Palestinians are secular. And what are we fighting over? Over what's in our head, which is really biblical and has no applicability. What are we fighting over? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Now, I understand that the Jews were persecuted in Europe and they need a place to be safe. That's a very legitimate concern. Okay, but you can work out that concern. You don't have to create another war or another enemy to deal with that concern. You can create a place where Jews feel safe, but also be in peace with the Palestinians. It's not inconsistent. To me, it is completely consistent, completely. So I don't really see the need for this conflict. I need to learn to live with the Palestinian, with you, with anybody else in peace. I need to treat you as a human being. You need to treat me as a human being. You need to like me or not like me based on who I am, not based on what you think is in my head.
Do you by any chance, and then I forgot whose turn it is, but do you by any chance get, now that you've been active, when you go through the airport, are you interrogated at all, or because you're Jewish, they just let you through?
I don't know why they let me through, but they let me through. I have an Israeli passport. I never had a problem. I never have a problem. I never had a problem. So no, I'm not interrogated. I'm not perceived as the enemy of Israel. I'm not the enemy of Israel. I actually support Israel living in peace. That's
Well, I want to say this. Certainly, first of all, Joseph, I certainly, as a Palestinian, want to thank you. First of all, for recognizing that we really are the same, and for you caring about my rights, and for you being disturbed at the fact that I am treated so badly. I mean, I think this is important, and I wish, one of the things that disturbs me when I go to Israel is when I leave Jerusalem itself and go outside, and go outside, I see Jews who are, I don't know if they do it intentionally or not, but they seem to have detached themselves from the reality of what's going on in Israel-Palestine in terms of the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. For example, in Tel Aviv, they live, they let live, they're happy, as if they don't know what the hell's going on. They don't. And I think this is really bad because they're living a lie. I really think they're living a lie by completely pretending that nothing is happening 30 miles away, that people are not being persecuted. So with this in mind, the fact that someone like you, who does not have to care about me, you have the power, and the fact that you do still care, I really do appreciate that, and I thank you. So what I want to do now is I want to give each a closing statement, of sorts. And I want to start with Antonio to wrap this session up. I know I've taken you away from either your families or from sleep, and I'm going to let you go back. I see Antonio's picture disappeared, so I'll go to Andrew. So if you can give us a closing statement on the future and what you think should happen or should not happen.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say to Joseph, don't be discouraged that the process is taking a long time. It has to take. The struggle for civil rights in America.
Antonio. Mute. Sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes.
The struggle against apartheid in South Africa for 40 years. So we have to keep working. We cannot give up, and we should not be discouraged that it's taking a long time. I think that it is important for more Jews like you, Joseph, to stand up and say, we've got to work together with Palestinians. They are not devils with horns. And we need to have people like Kamal on the Palestinian side give a wonderfully positive representation of Palestinian people to Israelis. And because ultimately politics is led by people's mindset. And when the mindset of people change, the politics can follow easily. As long as people are caught up in fear and stereotyping of the other as demons, there can be no political solution. No one will risk it. So I'm really, really positive about the kind of work that you're doing to create federations or whatever you want to call it, a vision of a shared future. That said, I do believe that shared future will have to have a sovereign state of Israel and a sovereign state of Palestine, and the idea of confederative bodies working underneath those two sovereignties, I think is marvelous. And I think it's totally necessary, not only marvelous, but necessary in order to create a warm peace, not a cold peace like Israel has with Egypt, but a warm peace where Israelis and Palestinians are doing joint economic projects, as you pointed out, where border management is shared, certainly around the old city. If the old city is going to become a place where Israelis and Palestinians can both come to worship God, there has to be some kind of joint security, joint management of certain areas, even if it's restricted to small areas, large areas, all of those details could be worked out. But I see that any viable solution has to include a spirit of cooperation. I think that spirit can come. I think that Israel needs leaders who believe in that. And that's why I have been so frustrated with the current government of Israel and the current Prime Minister of Israel, because he has just continued to indulge in this mindset that says security, 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 and but the subtext of that is we don't trust the Palestinians. I really am so frustrated with that government, and I really believe that it will change. And I think that I believe in God, that God wants peace, and I believe that God on high is not going to stop pulling the levers that can be pulled in order to bring about some change. It may not happen tomorrow, but the BDS movement will help hasten that day. And so even though I don't like to see my fellow Jews hit in the pocketbook, as Antonio said, the people of Tel Aviv have to wake up and recognize that this is in their vital interest to get involved and not to just let people on the far right run their country. So,
Thank you.
That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I'm going to move to Antonio now again. But I want to I just want to make one comment, Dr. Wilson and the rest. You know, there was a time before the first Intifada, or the first uprising, and I think officially before 1990, when the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel were open to each other, where Israelis went and shopped. I remember that as a kid. I remember this guy, his name was Moshe, and we lived in a town, all Palestinian town called Bitunia. When he used to pass by, he used to come and drink coffee at our house. I remember as a kid when we go to the vegetable markets in Ramallah, that there would be Jews there shopping, Israelis there shopping. But then we also had an uprising. And some say, well, if it was open, why did you have an uprising? Because even though we had a better situation in terms of free movement, we still didn't have rights. We were not recognized as citizens of any state. We were not citizens of the state we lived in. And some people minimize that, but that's important. I mean, the fact that the lunacy that Palestinians who have never been to Jordan, who want citizenship, someone from the West Bank, who wants to travel and needs to be a citizen of some country, has to actually go to Jordan and ask Jordan to give them a courtesy citizenship, a courtesy passport, so they can travel. This is lunacy, and this is why there was an uprising. Now, I'm going to go to Antonio. Give us your closing remarks, please. Antonio.
Well,
Antonio.
It's possible that the solution of the Israeli and the Palestinian problem will basically settle once and for all the struggle between the children of Sarah and the children of Hagar. You know, these two women are responsible for those two lineages. Don't forget that the granddaughter of Hagar married Esau, the brother of Jacob. So these are basically one lineage of Abraham fighting with each other for a very small piece of land. For us, who represent basically the majority of the international community, what we want to see is these two peoples who are connected with one single root of Abraham to live in peace with each other. We still have the vices, weaknesses, and all the troubles of the last 10,000 years in which we want to do a lot of evil to the people we dislike or the people we disagree or the people we hate. The Palestinians and the Jews have something in common. Each wanted to throw the other one into the sea. The problem is that only one got organized and has the capability to do that to the other one. The international community will not allow that because we have grown, we have evolved to understand that the rights of one are as important as the rights of the others. So we have to protect the rights of the Jews and the rights of the Palestinians and prevent them from going at each other's throats and create a bigger war that would affect everyone on the planet. So those of us like me who care about human rights and have seen the development of human rights from the US to the United Nations, we want to see that the rights of the Jews and the rights of the Palestinians are protected. And for this, we have to mobilize the majority. the majority in the international community, the majority within the Palestinians and the Arabs, and the majority within the Jews. These things cannot be dictated by minorities. Minorities cannot respond for the interests of the majority, especially since the minority are narrow-minded and they do not respond. They do not understand the larger view of the majority, because the majority of the Jews in Israel are secular, highly developed, highly evolved people, and so it is basically on the Palestinians. But the people have to get involved, organize, and determine what is it that they want from the point of view of a Jewish state, from the point of view of the two states, and from the point of view of return of the refugees. All these things have to be discussed with reason.
Thank you. You know, Antonio, the muted Antonio. Did you mute it? Yeah. Antonio hit on two good points, just as a light moment. He seemed to have to corroborate what most guys have been saying since the beginning, since Adam actually, that all of the world's problems are from women. He's saying that the problem is with Hagar and Sarah, so he just proved it, that all the problems in this world came from women. And the second thing, it's kind of ironic that both want to push each other to the sea. You know, I remember years ago, I read something about where people, the countries that have the higher percentage of people who know how to swim. And in Israel-Palestine was one of the lowest countries where people don't know how to swim. So I wonder if that has anything to do with the fact that they want to throw each other into the sea. So I leave it up to you, Joe, to give us the closing remarks on a positive note. Do you agree with Antonio's important point that all the root cause of all the problems in this world are women?
You must be kidding. You want me to respond to that?
No, I am kidding.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate you. I think you did a terrific job. This is a very, very good forum. You know, I'm scrolling down through the notes, and I just want, you know, Max has done a terrific job. I think you should do this more often, bring more people, and give it more publicity, because this is a terrific forum. People can stay at their home and not only listen to what other people are saying, but they can have an internal discussion. So I want to encourage you to continue to do this, and hopefully one day you'll have. Because I spoke with Max and he said you can have thousands of viewers. So hopefully, and I think you could get to thousands if you get the right publicity. And so I want to congratulate you. You did a terrific job today.
Thank you very much. And thank you all very much for coming on a Sunday. And for next week, we're gonna actually start bringing people from Israel-Palestine, people on the ground, to join us and have this discussion go one step further from people who are actually going through. So thank you all for coming so much. I really appreciate this. It's always an honor to have you. Thank you. Until next time. Take care, everyone. Take care, everyone.
We need more women in this discussion. Men alone cannot settle this problem. We need the women.
Okay, Sarah. There's a Sarah memo in there, and
those representatives of Sarah and Hagar has to be online.